In today's lesson, we are taking information from the last video, graphing and transforming sine and cosine functions, and then today we're just putting it all together. So it's just same ideas, but it's all together in one problem, and it can get a little bit complicated. The most complicated part is here, when we have a period change and a phase shift at the same time. So that's where it gets a little spicy. And notice how we have a completely blank graph because depending on the problem, how we label the graph is going to change sometimes drastically. So it's completely blank for us to come up with the units and how to label everything. So first, I like to just get all of my information down. So that 4 out in front is our amplitude, which is that A value. This is telling you how high, kind of the max and the min points of our graph. We're going to use this right here to find the period. And if you remember, that is 2 pi divided by b. Well, in this case, our b is 1/2. So it's 2 pi divided by 1/2. Dividing by 1/2 is the same as multiplying by 2. So this is 4 pi. So if you think about a sine function, it usually would go from 0 to 2 pi. This is changing it to go from 0 to 4 pi. So it's hitting these main points right here from 0 to 4 pi. Okay, now we're going to look at the phase shift. We have to look at B and C for this, which is the opposite of B divided by the absolute value of B. And then I guess this should also be absolute value over here. Okay, so the opposite of C. So if you think of C as negative pi over 4, it's now going to be positive pi over 4. And we're dividing by 1/2. Dividing by 1/2 is the same as multiplying by 2. So 2 times pi over 4. And that simplifies to pi over 2. So because it's positive, that is a shift right. So our starting point is shifted right, pi over 2. And the number at the end is the vertical shift. So this would be down 1, which puts your midline, that dotted line that cuts it in half, at y equals -1. Okay, so I'm going to start putting some things on the graph. I'm going to just draw the y-axis. And we can draw the x-axis. I'll just draw them in the middle right now. And I always like to first put the midline on there. So at -1 is my dotted line. And because the amplitude is 4, up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's going to be the top, and then down 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down here will be the bottom of my graph. So just putting little marks, just making myself a little note. Now, to know how to label the x-axis is sometimes the hard part. So what I want to point out, if you think about that kind of one revolution here, so we need to get 1, 2, 3, 4 main points in that revolution. So not counting that starting point. We need to know the distance between each point. We know the distance between them is always the same. And there's 4 distances. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if the period is 4 pi, I always take the period, whatever the period is, and divide it by 4 so I know the distance between each of my points. So in this case, it is pi. So the distance between the points is pi, but there's a phase shift of pi over 2. So when we go to label it, I want you to think about creating a common denominator between those two. So this is like over 1. To create a common denominator, it would be 2. So I'm going to count by pi over 2's. So 1 unit to the right is pi over 2, and then pi, and then 3 pi over 2, and then 2 pi. So 3 pi, and so on. So every 2 units is pi. So what I like to do is get the box on my graph that shows 1 revolution. I have this shift of pi over 2 to the right. So pi over 2, so here's my starting part of the box, and I know it's got to go all the way up there, all the way down there. And the length of it is that period, which is 4 pi. And 2 units creates a pi, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4. This right here is my box where I start graphing my sine graph. Sine starts at the middle, and then I have to go over pi to get my next point. So that's 2 units. I need to go all the way up, 2 units back to the middle, 2 units all the way down, 2 units back. So there in this box is my sine. And then you can continue this pattern outside of the box. I just use the box as that starting point. So these problems take a lot. There's a lot of information that goes into graphing these. We're going to do one more, and we're going to do a cosine function. Okay, so here's the cosine function. One small thing that I changed is instead of x, I just used theta. I like to throw that in there. Students sometimes get freaked out by it, but just remember, theta is a variable. Theta is x. You can interchange them. Okay, so let's start with the amplitude. That is, so the A is 3. So the period comes from here. So 2 pi divided by 4, which is pi over 2. So if you think about cosine starting up, going down, going back up, so usually it's from 0 to 2 pi. This time it'll be, the length of it is pi over 2. But we're not going to start at 0 because we have a phase shift. So the opposite of c, so negative pi over 2, and it's divided by 4. Dividing by 4 is the same as multiplying by 1/4. So negative pi over 2 times 1/4 is, so negative pi over 8. So we're shifting it because it's negative. We're shifting it left pi over 8. And then we have this vertical shift that is up 2, which means the midline is at the line y equals 2. So let's start getting some things on the graph. So just draw the x and the y-axis, and let's start with the midline is going to be up 2. So here's my dotted line. And then the amplitude is 3, so from the midline up 1, 2, 3, and down 1, 2, 3, just little markers to remind myself. Okay, so remember when we're graphing, we have to, the revolution is kind of broken up into these 4 sections. So if the period is pi over 2, what is the width of each section? So if we take the period and divide it by 4, so the period's pi over 2, dividing by 4 is the same as multiplying by 1/4. So the width is pi over 8. So this is nice. If this, we're always looking at, okay, the width of those units, and then what's the phase shift? You kind of want to look at common denominator between those. Well, in this time, it's 8. So we can label everything as pi over 8. Okay, so pi over 8, so 1 pi over 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pi over 8 is pi. So then half of that, so 1, 2, 3, 4 pi over 8 is actually pi over 2. So let's try to draw that box. We have this shift left pi over 8. So left pi over 8 is our starting of the box, and we have to go get that full amplitude on there. Okay, so the period is pi over 2, and pi over 2 is 1, 2, 3, 4 units total. So I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3, 4. So I just have a skinny box this time. and every point is over pi over 8, and every unit is pi over 8. So this one's kind of nice. So let's see, cosine. Cosine has to start at the top, go over pi over 8 to the middle, pi over 8 to the bottom, pi over 8 back to the middle, and then to the top. So then we have that, and then you can just keep continuing that to extend it. So we use the box to get started, and then you can always extend it. So there is your full video on putting everything together into one graph. Some of these aren't too bad, and some of them do get pretty difficult, but we will work on this together. Good luck.